Cool. So I hope that everybody had received the prerequisites document and did have the time to go through the prerequisites. Let's quickly summarize those. I've asked you guys to actually have a ProxMox server with internet access ready, to have the X2Go client software on your workstation and or laptop. Optionally have an SFTP client like WinSCP or FileZilla, which will make it easier to copy files into the sandbox, and a Debian 11 container where, you know, there were a couple of further instructions like download an image for the OpenWrt router and how to install the client container. So the reason I've asked you guys to do that before is very simple, because we have people here on the channel who don't have, well, like I know you guys in Denmark and Romania and the Netherlands, you all have those beautiful gigabit connections, but normal humble people like myself here in Germany or Giri in India does not have that. So the reason is that this just takes time to install, and so I thought I'd make that little prerequisite document. If you're watching this on YouTube, of course, all the prerequisites will be in the description of the video.
If you could have a gigabit connection, you would have.
Yeah, no. I mean, no, because, you know, obviously, I mean, if I have, there's no use of me doing the stuff quickly and nobody can follow us. Maybe.
But still, keep the pace reached.
Yeah. So guys, here's what we will do today. We will build a test sandbox in ProxMox. And some of you might remember a video I did a year ago where we did something quite similar in VirtualBox. The title of the video was something like build a virtual home network in VirtualBox. And so why are we doing this when I did it already a year ago? The thing is that at the time I didn't know about ProxMox, and also there are a couple of, you know, advantages that we can use of ProxMox as opposed to VirtualBox. VirtualBox can only do virtual machines, whereas ProxMox can do containers. So the layout of what we're going to build today is we want to build a virtual network inside ProxMox. So that will be our sandbox network, which will basically be a virtual LAN that we build. And we will have a router at the end or at the edge or at the perimeter of this virtual LAN, which will then go into the virtual WAN, which of course in turn is our physical LAN, right? That will enable us to do stuff like VPN access from the outside, or test things like port forwarding without testing them live on our real internet router, which could cause bad things to happen. So it's better to do stuff like this in a sandbox. And the main difference between what we're doing today and the video that I did a year ago is with regards to the client station. So the main question is, how do we get inside that sandbox? How do we have a graphical client inside that sandbox? In the video a year ago, we used a virtual machine running Linux or Windows. Now, with ProxMox, we can use containers. And that has a couple of implications, of course, because ProxMox uses QEMU to run virtual machines, and QEMU has hardware emulation. And one of those hardware emulations, of course, is the display. With an LXC container, we don't have a display. So we need to think of how we are actually going to get inside that sandbox from the outside onto that container, and how we're going to spawn a graphical environment on that container. Good. Having said that, let's start. And the first thing that we're actually going to do, let me just bring up my ProxMox console here. Here it is. So the first thing that we will need to do is that we actually create the virtual network that we want to use. And that is very easy. It's only 2 or 3 clicks. You need to select the ProxMox virtual environment node on the left side here in your console. You need to go to System, then Network. And what we're going to do, we're just going to click on Create, and we're just going to create a Linux bridge. So you can name that bridge however you want. I think there is a kind of convention that it needs to have VMBR and then numbers. So let me just call it VMBR and then let's say 9999. And also I want to make that bridge VLAN aware. We will not do VLANs today, but maybe in a second step you want to actually define VLANs inside your sandbox and maybe do some of the stuff that I show in my videos. And there is a lot of stuff that you can do with VLAN. So let's make it VLAN aware right from the beginning and then just click on create. Now, in order to have that change applied, you need to click on apply configuration up here. And yes, that's what I want to do. And that should actually create a new bridge, in my case, VMBR /999 on your ProxMox server. If anybody can't follow, if I go too fast or whatever, if there's any issues, just interrupt me or fire a comment in the Sunday Funday chat, okay?
I am actually getting an error saying you need if up down 2 to reload network configuration 500.
Ah, okay. So what you need to do is you need to go to the shell of your ProxMox server and you need to install IP something too. Right? So cool. So now we have that virtual sandbox network. And the next thing I want to do with you guys is actually install the perimeter router. So that's the OpenWrt router that will connect our virtual LAN, which is our sandbox network, and the physical LAN. So before we can install OpenWrt, or rather, add the OpenWrt image to a virtual machine, we need to create that virtual machine. So what you need to do is, again, in ProxMox, click on Create VM, and that's going to be our router. So I'm going to give it the number 999. I'm going to call it perimeter OWRT or whatever. Feel free to choose any name that is DNS compliant. On the next screen, I choose do not use any media because we don't want to install from a CD or DVD or the like. We will just give it a ready-made disk image. So do not use any media here. Next, system, those settings are okay, so we don't have to change them. Now, with regards to the hard disk, it doesn't matter what you type in here because we will throw the hard disk away once we have created that virtual machine. Unfortunately, there is no setting of creating a virtual machine without a hard disk. So we have to create it with a hard disk and then we will throw it away and replace it with the OpenWrt image. So whatever you type in here, it doesn't really matter. Just click on next. One socket, one core is more than enough for a little router, so that's fine. We don't have to change that. Memory, 2 gig is much too much. What we need is like 512 megabytes at most. And that's actually an advantage of using OpenWrt and not using something else like pfSense or OpenSense. You could use OpenSense, right? You could, create an OpenSense or pfSense router here, but using OpenWrt is much, much lighter. So this is where we actually select the sandbox network, which we just created. So my VMBR /999. Now you need to know when you start an OpenWrt image from scratch, it will actually interpret the first network interface, so ETH0, as being the LAN interface, and the second network interface will be the WAN interface by default. Obviously, you can change all this later on in the config, but let's just give it the virtual interface as a first interface, then we can more easily attach the other one. I untick the box firewall because we don't need firewall on that interface. It will not be visible on the outside. And OpenWrt has, of course, its own firewall. Virt.io para-virtualized is okay, by the way. We don't need to use, Intel E1000 or anything like this. And let me just click on finish here. Cool. So the next thing that we will do is that we will actually import the disk image, which you guys have downloaded from the OpenWrt website. So in order to do that, I will open a shell on my ProxMox. Oh, and by the way, I have published the document with all the commands in a PDF document. Let me just show you that on the Discord. Whoops, here we go. So here in the project registration channel, you can see there's a PDF, Discord project sandbox ProxMox lab guide.pdf. That contains all the commands that I will type, so you can easily copy and paste them from there. Right? I hope that PDF is okay for everyone. You don't have to type them as we go. Just move that back to the right screen. Here we go. Great. So I go to my ProxMox, I open the shell, and in the root directory, I have that OpenWrt image file. And what I can do now is I can import that file using the command qm import disk. I then need to specify the identifier of the virtual machine, which in my case is 999. Then I need to give it the file name. And last but not least, I need to specify the storage. I will put it on the local-lvm storage. So I just need to type local-lvm. So qm, import disk, ID of the machine, name of the image, and then the name of the storage you want to use. So let's fire that off. Should go through. Again, if anybody is not at the point, just shout or fire a comment in the Sunday Funday chat, which I need to have open to see if anybody speaks. Awesome. Here we go. Great. So when we now go to the newly created virtual machine, which in my case is that perimeter OWRT, and I go to the hardware, I can now see there is an unused disk 0, which is in local LVM. But before I attach that disk, I want to actually get rid of the first disk that I had to create when I created the virtual machine. So what I do with this disk is I detach it. Yes. And now you need to be careful which one you select, right? The one that I just detached is unused disk 1, which has the ending QCOW2. I remove that disk. Yep, goodbye, it's gone. And as a next step, I need to actually attach the disk which we have just imported. So if I do a double click or I click on edit, I get that window here. And if I select the controller, I advise you to use IDE 0. It's not a hard prerequisite, but I have tested it with IDE and it works well. So maybe feel free to run tests if it works with other controllers, but I just know that with IDE 0 it works flawlessly. So I just selected IDE 0 and here's the disk I imported it, and if I click on add, now you can see that the disk has actually been attached here. So now I have that OpenWrt image with the right hard disk with the OpenWrt image on it, and I have the network device which is in my virtual sandbox. What I need to do next is I need to attach the physical network interface that points to my physical LAN, which will be, of course, our virtual WAN. So I go again to hardware, then add, I select network device, and this time I select my physical network, which in my case is VMBR99. Again, I untick the firewall tick box because that only shows the WAN side of OpenWrt, which of course has a great firewall, so I don't really need the firewall here. And as a model, I can again choose VirtIO because we're running Linux here, so it will recognize that virtualized hardware very, very well. Click on Add. So as you can see now, I have the internal network and the external network attached. And the last thing I need to do before I can actually start that OpenWrt router is that I need to go to the options and actually tell it in which order it shall boot, right? So there is an item here called boot order. Do a double click on that one or click on edit. And I just untick everything. And I should have my local disk here somewhere. There it is. I just move it to the top. And then enable it. So that means that when it boots, it will always boot from this disk, which we have just imported. And click on OK. Cool. That's it for the perimeter router. So we can actually start it now. Everybody there? Could everybody follow? Anybody? Any issues? Anybody? No?
So far, so good.
I take silence as
Yeah,
acceptance.
oh, good. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Perfect. Cool. So let's start it. And if I, at the same time, open the console of that virtual machine, I should actually see it boot. And you can see, you know, this group menu here, that is actually the 2 or 3 seconds when the router boots, you know, when the LEDs are blinking, and when you can push the button to put it into fail-safe mode. And it should, you know, boot up okay here.
Yeah, mine didn't boot, unfortunately.
It did not boot?
No, it says start failed, QEMU exited with code 1.
Applying the host network config is apparently what Julian says you need to
The
do.
host network config. Where's that?
That was actually the button, you know, apply configuration here, up here, you know, under system network and then apply configuration, which I think you did, but then you got the error. Network and then apply configuration. Go there again. Awesome. Here we go.
Yes. Okay.
I told you we'll get it.
Very good.
Thank you. All right, let's see if it boots this time.
So try and start it. And that looks much better, doesn't it? Awesome.
Hey, okay.
Awesome. Here we go. I told you we'd get it sorted before the end of the episode, right? with the help of everybody, right? Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian.
Perfect. Cool.
Yeah, spare any points.
So now let's briefly talk about how we can actually access the sandbox, right? Because we don't want to fiddle around with command line and all this. We want a graphical client, and also as we don't have a VM, we can't, you know, just do a right click on the container and say console, because all we would see is obviously, you know, a terminal window, right? Because that's all we can do with containers, because containers do not have graphics hardware. So I thought the way we would solve that problem is by using X2Go. Why have I chosen X2Go? We could as well, you know, use VNC or RDP or the like. The advantage of X2Go is that it is quite well encapsulated in the client, and also that there is a server package available for Linux. And from a networking perspective, X2Go is also very transparent because it only uses SSH. So it's really, really easy and nice to use. And it's got a couple of other advantages, like you can use the clipboard, you know, and it feels like the real thing, right? It's not, you know, like sluggish with a lot of latency like VNC, at least on a local network. Obviously, it's not good for WAN connections probably, but for the local network, it's really, really good. So when we go to the Sandbox client, so that is the client container, the Debian 11 container, which I've asked you guys to set up, and we go into that container, let's just quickly enable the X2Go server by typing systemctl enable X2Go server, and that will actually enable the service at boot time so that it comes up automatically. And obviously we also want to make sure that it is started. So the second command we're going to type is systemctl start X2Go server. Now before we can connect to that system, I would like to create a user which we can use to connect to. We should not connect using the root user. There is a couple of reasons for that, because we will start an X11 environment here that is actually very, very vulnerable if we're using it, if we're running everything as a root user. We might also run a web browser inside that session and all these things. We should not be root when we do that. So let's create a user, and the command to add a user, again, you find all this in the document. YouTubers, you find this in the description of the video, right? So we type user add to add a user. Then we specify -m, that will actually generate the home directory of the user. We do -G to modify the group, so that will not modify the primary group, which will be the same like the username, but it will add another group. And as an additional group, I want this user to have the group sudo. This will enable the user on Debian. If you're a member of the sudo group, you can use the sudo command to execute stuff as root. And last but not least, we need to give it a shell. So that's -s. And here, of course, we specify /bin/bash. And last but not least, of course, we need to give it a username. Let me call that user Mark3, because I think I already have a Mark and a Mark2. So let me call it Mark3. You can, of course, call it whatever you want. Probably your first name. Let's do that. So the user has been created. You can verify this by checking the home directory. You should have a subdirectory for, here it is, Mark3, so that has been created. And also if you do a cut on the /etc/passwd, you know, there should be an entry for that user saying Mark3, home Mark3 and bin bash, right? So, of course, we need to give that user a password. By default, there is no, you know, specific password set. So all I need to do is type PASSWD, so short for password, and then the username. In my case, that's Mark3. And it's asking me for a new password. So let me give this a top secret password. I'm actually typing top secret as I speak. Here we go. And that should actually have the user created. We can double check on that. If we just quit the shell here and then try to log in as that user with the password, here we go, I'm in here. So that went well. And I can also check the sudo. If I do sudo bash or anything, it's asking me for my password again. And here I am, I'm root. Perfect. So we have that client machine that has the X2Go server activated. We have it, we have a non-root user. Just before we connect to it, I would like you to double check that if you go on that Sandbox client to the network tab, that it's actually connected to your physical LAN. So to the same network like the workstation that you use to do this stuff. Because now in the next step, we want to connect to it. So in order to do that, what we will do is we will actually launch X2Go. I should have it open here somewhere. No, I haven't, not a problem. Let me launch it. And here you click on Session, New Session. You give it any fancy name. Then you need to give it the host name, either the IP address of the container or its host name. If you can't remember that, or if you don't know which IP address it has, just go back to the ProxMox console, go to the client here, click on console, and inside the console type IB -br addr, and it should show you the IP address of that machine, which you can then, copy, then go back to X2Go, and then paste it in here. My login will be Mark. The SSH port will be 22. And here's a nice thing of X2Go, another nice thing of X2Go. X2Go will actually spawn an X11 connection over SSH. Now, we could of course launch X applications over SSH, but in order to have a full desktop, we need a so-called window manager. And we also needed to, start in the right order and everything. And that was the reason why I asked you to install Mate. Mate is just, a graphical environment for Linux. We could have used any other of these graphical environments like KDE or GNOME or XFCE are some of the more popular ones. Cinnamon is used a lot as well. IceWM is a very light one which uses very, very few storage. Now, I just happened to use Mate, so I said, well, why not have Mate? But if you prefer KDE or GNOME, you can, go back to the container and do apt install GNOME or apt install KDE, and then, switch the desktop environment. But the good thing with X2Go is that you can actually select the desktop environment to use. So let's select Mate, as we have Mate installed. If you want, you can give it additional options like input-output, which screen to use, full screen, etc. But another nice thing with X2Go is that you can actually scale the resolution. So we're not, fixed to 800 times 600, even if we specify it here, but we can scale it or even, make it bigger and use full screen and the like. So once I have that, I just click on OK. And I think it was that one. And if you now click on that symbol here, it should actually open a little window and ask you for the password. So if you type that in, I might have that on a different screen here.
It's running.
And here it comes. It took a lot of time, but here it comes. So, and as you can see, I can make that bigger, iconize it. I want to go back now. I shouldn't have iconized it. Here we go. I can, change the size of the screen. It just follows, dynamically. So that's a really, really good thing with X2Go. And I might need to log in again here. And from inside that environment, we can now do, everything in the sandbox, such as open the page of the router and everything. But first, before we are able to do this, we need to give it a second network interface. And that's actually the network interface of the sandbox. So at this point, let's click on System and Log Out. Click on Log Out. That one should close. We just wanted to make sure that it's working. And now we go back to the ProxMox and actually give it the sandbox network interface as a second interface. Because remember, we want to use that container to actually get into the sandbox, which we can't at the moment because we don't have the network interface yet. So going back to ProxMox, again, on that sandbox client, I go to network. Now, my first interface, which is my physical LAN, in my case is ETH0. So I just click on Add. And I say, okay, the next interface is ETH1. I want to use DHCP on IPv4. I leave IPv6 on static for the time being. If you want to serve DHCP, you can select that, but we're not going to talk much about IPv6 today. And as a bridge, obviously, I give it the newly created virtual bridge, which we have just created in the beginning. I do not need a firewall there because the bridge is not visible to the outside world. It just exists inside the ProxMox server. So let me just add that. Now, the tiny problem here is that this is not really dynamic necessarily. If I check on the command line and I type IP-BRADDR, chances are that I didn't get, an IP address on that one. I might try, /etc, or let me use systemd, systemctl restart networking, but probably it will fail. Oh no, will it fail?
Which machine is this?
No,
this is a sandbox.
The sandbox client. It did the trick. So restarting the network inside the sandbox client using systemctl restart networking. I will copy and paste that into the chat. and you can copy paste it. If that doesn't work, and if using IP-BR ADDR you can't see a 192.168.1. something address, then presumably you will have to just restart the container, right? So just, select reboot here or shut down and then restart it. So just waiting for everyone to actually have a 192.168.1. something address. Gives me time to take a sip of coffee.
Coffee, always good.
Yes.
Like the black stuff while you do this kind of work.
I actually have a sign up here, you can't see it, which says, behind every successful person is a substantial amount of coffee. I think that's so true. not that I would
Very
call
true.
myself, not that I would call myself exceptionally successful or anything, but it's something to strive for. Cool, so I assume everybody has a 192.168.1. something address. Are we good to go?
Yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. So now let's again go back to X2Go and launch that session again. Takes a while. Comes up on a different screen now. That's okay. Here we go. Let me make it bigger. And what I can now do from inside the Sandbox machine, I should be able to go to Applications, Internet. I should have a Firefox ESR here and browse to the 192.168, which I have obviously done before, 192.168.1.1 address, which is of course the address of my Sandbox router, and it should show me the login screen of Lucy. And I have no password, so just root and no password. I should get to the configuration page of my OpenWrt router. Did that work for everybody?
Yep, worked for me.
Awesome.
I am still in the state of recovering my setup, so I can only watch along and do the rest. But I had a question about this setup. The Sandbox uplink, where does it actually route to? Just to your default gateway on your primary machine of
Yes.
ProxMox? So wouldn't it be smart to have a firewall rule that basically blocks every IP address in the local subnet that is basically the network to your gateway to drop everything except default gateway / DNS server?
Yes.
Potentially DSP?
What we will actually do is, you mean like the Sandbox client routing out through the physical LAN? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the physical LAN basically it allows to broadcast in that side. So from the Sandbox client, you would be able to hop over the OpenWrt virtual router and then just broadcast into the main network there.
Oh, okay.
So by default, you could say on the one side, basically drop every 192.168, whatever your subnet is there, except for the IP address of your gateway. That way, at least all your clients would not be able to communicate to that main network.
Yes, very true. I mean, if we had other people accessing it or whatever, or if we were testing software which we really want to encapsulate, in a safe environment, then we would definitely need to do that. So we would, maybe I would even go further and set up a separate VLAN, going out, not let it go through my LAN where I have all my machines and everything, but have a separate VLAN, let it go directly to the router. That's actually what I did with my work laptop and with my wife's work laptop. I set up separate VLANs and there's only the laptop inside, nothing else, right? Which is sounds a bit like overkill, but I didn't want, get infected by ransomware or malware from one company and have it jump over to the other company, right? That would be a very bad thing. So I really created separate VLANs. Now, we may do that, maybe in one of the next episodes. Presumably we'll not do that today, But there is another thing, which is actually a good point you mentioned the network, because we still have one thing that we need to sort out on that Sandbox client. And that is actually, if you, inside the Sandbox client, you can now open a terminal inside the Sandbox client under, application system tools, and there is the Mate terminal. I have actually increased the font size for this a little bit. And if I type IP route there, you can see that the default route of that client, in my case, is not going through the Sandbox, because it has this nice physical LAN interface with this nice physical LAN router. It doesn't want to go through the Sandbox. So we need to tell it to actually go through the Sandbox, right? And of course, we could do that by changing the route, right? We could do IP route delete and IP route add and all these things. But as we do have DHCP inside the Sandbox and DHCP outside the Sandbox, there is an easier way of actually doing this. And that is if we actually keep that terminal open and do a cd into /etc/DHCP. And inside here, you can see there is a dhclient.conf file. And that config file actually tells the DHCP client of that machine which information to request from the DHCP server. So the DHCP server gives me an IP address, it gives me a domain name, it gives me a route, it gives me all these things and a subnet mask. But I can actually also tell the DHCP client to request only a part of that. And what I want to do now is I want to actually tell the DHCP client of that machine to not ask for a gateway from the physical LAN, but rather ask for a gateway from the virtual LAN, right? So what we need to do is we need to edit the dhclient.conf file. And the nice thing now that we have a graphical environment is that we do not need to fiddle around with VI or the like, right? So let me just copy paste that one in the chat because I think it's not in the document. Copy and paste it here. There you go, guys. So you can copy paste it into that terminal session. And Mate, so the graphical environment Mate comes with a text editor. It's not a very sophisticated text editor, but it does the trick. And that text editor is called Pluma. And now that I want to change a file where I have no write access, only root has write access, I actually need to start Pluma with sudo. So what I type is sudo Pluma, which is the name of the text editor in Mate. And then I give it the file name to edit, which is dhclient.conf. Let me again copy paste that into the channel so that you don't need to type it. Here we go. Once I do that, Pluma should come up. Well, it asks for the password, obviously, because I'm doing a sudo here. And then, it opens this, this dhclient file. And as you can see, there are a couple of options in here. Like it sends my host name to the DHCP server and it requests a couple of things. It requests a lot of things from the DHCP server, like the default route, the domain name server, so DNS servers, which domains to search for, the host name, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, in the document, in the PDF document, I have sent you, or I have rather written a couple of settings that we may use alternatively. So that's pretty much at the bottom of that file. And what we will rather do is you can actually define settings per interface in this file, right? So I have settings here for Ethernet 1 and Ethernet 2. In my case, they are called Ethernet 0 and Ethernet 1, so I need to change that. What I will do, I will now copy all these configurations, the whole configuration from here, from that file. Just go back to my X2Go client. Where is it? Where is it? Can't see it. I'm lost. Oh, the second one. Okay, sorry. Now what I do in Pluma, I just can all this and paste the config from the file which I've sent you. Now this is a nice thing of using X2Go again, right? I can use the clipboard. So I have a local document, I copy stuff from there and I paste it into an editor running on the virtual machine. And as my interfaces are called Ethernet 0 for the physical interface, so the physical interface needs to have the short settings, and my other interface is called Ethernet 1. You can double check that in the ProxMox console what the names of the interfaces are. I just need to change the interface names here. And when I save that file and restart the networking service on the client, it should now not ask for a gateway and a route and all these things from the physical network, but rather do that from the virtual network. But I can still access it because it will still, ask for an IP address. So what I do now is I do File, Save and Close. Just close that. And again, double checking on IP route. That goes to the 139.139. I give it a try to actually restart the networking service. If it doesn't work, I will have to reboot the container once more. But let's give it a try. Sudo systemctl restart networking. I will be disconnected for a short moment, of course, because I'm connected, using X2Go client. And it comes back, which is a good thing. Let me copy paste that into the chat. Oops, sorry. So that's actually really the last step. What I want to achieve here is that after restarting the network services, if I type IP-BR again, I should have an address from my physical LAN, and I should have an address from my virtual LAN, and the default route should now go through the sandbox network, right? So at this point, if we go back to the draft, at this point, we have this client, we have access from the outside. I might actually use my tablet because I can't write with the mouse. So we have access from the outside, not using L, but using X2Go. And we have this running in an LXC container. Of course, that's what I wanted to write. And we are now forcing the container to take this route if it wants to go to the outside world. And that is exactly what we wanted to achieve, right? Once we connect to the container and to the graphical environment, it behaves as if we were exclusively in the sandbox. It will not go outside, going this way back. It will not do that because it doesn't have a route here anymore. And now in the next step, what we can do, of course, we can, add machines to the network, which at the time I added a second router and I added a Windows machine. You can add as many containers as you want, as many VMs as you want. Now, if you wanted, for example, to move containers that you already have, move them over into the sandbox, what you can do very easily, like I have this Pi-hole here running in another sandbox, I would just go to network and actually change the network adapter to the newly created sandbox and click on OK. And then this container would be in the sandbox as well, right? So just give it a network interface in the sandbox, and then you can add as many machines as you like and as many services as you like. And then you have a real network where you can run tests. Now there's a couple of fine tuning that you may want to do or may not want to do. It's not really necessary, but it might be nice to actually do it. On the OpenWrt router, obviously you can give it a password under, I think it's system administration, right? Give it a password. And furthermore, we can, under network, DHCP and DNS, you could give it a local domain name, like I could call it sandbox.1mark50.com or whatever, and you could customize the thing as you would with your local LAN, right? And
depending on the DNS needs, I would also say like use an external DNS server so it doesn't like at all query your local DNS server.
Yeah, it depends on how you set. Yeah, good point. Because this way you could actually easily avoid machines being visible if you went, to DNS forwardings and you would say, okay, I want to, use 8.8.8.8 or 1.1.1.1 or whatever, 9.9.9.9, yeah,
Because usually the local subnet you have running on a router also allows DNS updates from local clients, which technically speaking, your router that's running the sandbox still is in your local subnet. So technically speaking, using that IP address, you could still update the DNS via dynamic
yeah,
DNS,
yeah.
which
That
might be nasty if you update the gateway, for example.
might cause problems. Now, this is actually the rebind protection you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love to untick this in test environments because it makes things so much easier, cross domain and all these things. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Many things, but it all depends on the need of the testing environment, of course. Like this is just a sandbox for like testing something on the sandbox itself and not for like in the network environment. But if you're like looking for a sandbox in the network environment, these kinds of things also become important. But of course, that's not the scope of literally what we're doing, but just to be clear
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. Cool. Having said that, that's all I wanted to show you guys today. So you now have a sandbox with a client and a router and the possibility to, put in whatever you want. It's all running on lightweight containers and lightweight VMs, so it shouldn't, use too many resources. You can actually run it on a very, very small PC. We were fully sharp on time, right? That was just 1 hour sharp. Unbelievable. So maybe short round of feedback. Was that useful for you guys?
Very useful, yes.
Absolutely, it was fun.
Awesome.
I need to redo it because I need to do it on like separate VLAN because I use like OpenWrt as my edge router of my home network, and now it's like addressing mask, but it's cool. It's really, really nice.
So what you could do in the next step, right? You could even, if you have Wi-Fi hardware on your ProxMox server, you could even try to actually go to the hardware tab of that router and add, a PCI device of your Wi-Fi from that ProxMox machine if you're not using it, or plugging in a USB Wi-Fi device or whatever. And you could actually spawn a Wi-Fi which would connect you directly to the sandbox, right? But that is obviously off scope for today because there's a lot of problems that you may encounter using mapping, especially USB devices.
Might actually be fun to do in one of the follow-up videos. Just have a VLAN to an actual physical router external of the ProxMox machine, and just put a VLAN with a Wi-Fi on there.
Yeah, why
Great.
not?
Absolutely, it would be cool.
Why not? I mean, guys, seriously, it's up to you, right? I mean, if you have any suggestions, come back to me, fire them into the general chat or into the project chat or whatever, and I'm ready to do any type of session here, and let's break things. That's fine. Awesome. So that's it. That's all I wanted to show you today. We can either open it for additional questions not related to the session, but at that point I might actually want to stop the recording, right? So let me just quickly try and do that.